Everbridge is the resilience company, and these are the public safety conversation series. A set of 5 interviews with public sector and private sector practitioners, experts in climate risk. Today we have with us 2 reputable climate risk and disaster resilience expert, Bapon Fakhruddin. He is an international climate change and disaster risk resilience expert, currently the technical director at Tonkin & Taylor. He brings 20 years of global expertise and is currently based in the South Pacific and New Zealand, but has worked across the world. Good morning, Bapon.
Thank you, Rachel.
With us is also Ede Ihias. Ede is an environmental engineer with a couple of decades of expertise at the World Bank and in development institutions, working on the resilience global practice, as a senior director and managing several disaster risk resilience projects around the world, notably China, Latin America, Africa, and since always committed to sustainable development.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you for wanting to share with us and for the collective good your first-hand expertise as technicians and as practitioners in the field of resilience. I am Rachele Gianfranchi. I am directing the Global Public Affairs Department in Everbridge. So how do we as a company give a contribution to sustainability? We design technology for good. Currently, we cover with our system about 6,000 between corporate and organizations as customers. I'll jump directly to the first question. Bapon, this question would be directed to you. Emergency alerting as part of the risk management and disaster reduction ecosystem is a mix of technology, procedures, and human assessments. What is, in your experience, the most effective from a cost, benefit, and other aspects, ways of alerting methods to have the largest availability, accessibility, and efficiency for the population?
Thanks, Rachel. That's a very big question you ask actually for. And I think that's one of the most critical elements for an early warning systems to understand the dissemination and notification system to outreach to the community from the service provider point of view. What actually makes us more resilience in this particular area, and how actually we can make sure that we have a multiple redundant communication system are in place. If you look at the current statistics or current summary from ITU, GSSM, or WMO, you may see actually that 70% of the global population has actually mobile coverage. That means that we are actually quite resilient in terms of any disaster that are happening. But there is also quite common protocol. You will see that whenever there is a disaster happen, your first disruption has happened actually all the mobile towers or the telecommunication system at first. So we need to make sure that actually what system are in place, which is robust enough and which could support for any sort of disaster. And it could have using a multiple communication system are in place.
Yes, thank you, Bapon. So innovation, research, reaching the last mile of the population. This brings me to the question for our second speaker here today, Ede. How do you see the relevance of public warning systems in this chain? How does this take place in a disaster risk situation in which an organization, an institution tries to increase the resilience?
Okay, excellent question. And let me try to break that into three parts. First, let me describe what is this hydrometeorological chain that you mentioned, or actually the World Meteorological Organization is calling the hydrometeorological cycle. It begins with all of the collection of weather, water, environment information through a variety of means. You have seen all those stations, hydrometeorological stations that collect wind information and pressure, etc. You have airplanes all around the world collecting information, satellites, and now lots of environmental sensors that are beginning to get connected into the Internet of Things. All that massive amount of data is then used and processed in supercomputers and all kinds of processing centers around the world to understand what is happening with the weather, what is happening with the water cycle, what may be happening with the climate change altogether. Now, for many years, the meteorological organizations focus a lot on that process and saying, look, this is what's happening with the weather. And then that information was sent somewhere. Now they have begun to realize that is not enough. And this is where the hydrometeorological chain or cycle comes in, because then in the middle, you have a variety of channels of communication. When there's an emergency related to weather, related to water, floods, heat waves, all of those things that impact individuals, businesses, communities, even regions at large, then those channels of communication take all that data and information and are able to pass it on to the final users. So all of those channels of communication in the middle are fundamental. And you were saying very correctly, those disaster information, the early warning systems, the early public alerts are an integral part of that channel. At the end, you have the users. What it becomes a cycle is that then always, every time that there's an incident, there are lessons to be learned. Because if a family, a community, a region is going to be more resilient, they need to be able to be ready for those disasters. They need to know what to do. Second, they need to be able to protect when the disaster happens. And third, they need to bounce back after the disaster. This cycle is an integral part of societies become more resilient, because if you don't have the information, if you don't know what to do with that information, if you are not able to bounce back from the disaster, you are not able to be resilient.
Thank you, Ede. So the mid-chain, the middle elements of the hydrometeorological cycle intended as the alerting and the communication of the population on the ground. Vapon, thank you. Vapon, if you allow me, I would ask you another question, which is related to some of the research that I have seen you presenting and discussing on several platforms. How do you see the relation between population reached by the message and cost of the different systems that can be designed? And what drives, in your experience, the choices that governments or institutions are inclined to make in terms of alerting systems in different geographic settings?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Rachel. That's a very important, and I think one of the very critical question that you raised, actually. Often you'll be seeing we actually don't understand holistically the overall system itself to cost benefit as well as acceptability by the community itself. What are the communication system we have in our society or in our country or in our district or province, and then try to understand actually what are the costs associated with those systems, and then how much it actually can cover to our population in the way we want to coverage sites, and then try to look at actually the cost benefit of overall based on the benefit, based on the accessibility of the population itself. And that gives you a quite realistic picture on the overall annual costing, implementation cost, plus how it will be look like over the long run to sustain that operation for a government or by through a community or through by an other entity. And then that's where I think it's quite critical for every agency who works on this public alert notification system, try to do some assessment first, understanding the system itself, what are the underutilized, unutilized, or the best possible scenario for that particular community, for that particular country, and try to understand the cost benefit of it. And from there on, come up with the implementation plan that's allow for a government to sustain such kind of system for any kind of disaster. Thanks.
Thank you. So the sustainability of the chosen system as one of the elements that might be sometimes overlooked and that needs to be paid attention to. Ide, I would have another question for you. From your experience, you have worked in many parts of the world in different risk situations. You have tried to help to reduce the risk, to prepare populations, countries for being more resilient to catastrophes, disasters. Do you have an anecdote maybe that you would like to share, or a story that has particularly left a trace in your professional experience in this field?
Look, I think that there are two important examples to show that strengthening resilience is possible. So Bangladesh is subject to cyclones of tremendous magnitude. And in the 80s, it's one of the most deadly cycles, actually killed tens of thousands of people. Now, through the building of alerting systems, because being able to tell every household and every community is coming a cyclone, and also to prepare the community, knowing what to do when the cyclone is coming, including the construction of shelters, the drills so that the community know where to go, the setup of schools and the expansion so that they can serve temporarily as shelters. A lot of experimentation and learning by the beginning of this century in the 2010s, a similar cyclone, similar intensity, similar characteristics, the number of deaths was only counted on a couple of dozen. So from tens of thousands to a couple of dozens in a country that was a low-income country. So these are rural villages that actually have very high levels of poverty, or their livelihoods are extremely fragile to this, and a country was able to transform through a very practical early warning system, through very practical set of measures in that process. Same with Ethiopia, for example. In the 80s, you will remember that the droughts caused tens of thousands of people dying out of famine. And actually, you see now in Africa, when these massive famines happen, and Ethiopia is particularly continues to be affected right now, the Horn of Africa is affected significantly, that information on the early warning systems to be able to tell the citizens, this is what is happening or going to happen, be prepared, the local governments come in, and developing financial systems to give assistance, ideally even before the drought peaks, has allowed tens of thousands of people that used to die not to have to face that horrible reality of famine. So two examples that actually make proof that resilience is possible. But look at what are the common characteristics. First, a solid early warning system that reaches different stakeholders in society. So it's not only the local government that is reached, it has to be every member of the community. Second, it is not just telling, oh, an emergency is coming and hoping for the best. It is complemented with practical measures to know what to do when that disaster is about to happen. And third, to continuously practice in drills so that you are, because everybody forgets what do they need to do in case of that process. And actually, at the time of this interview, a large hurricane hit Florida. And again, these issues of early warning systems are highly sophisticated, but not a lot of people know what to do or decide that they do not want to be protected in that process. So it's not only the early warning system, it's all of the complementary actions around that process. But if you don't have a good early warning system that is able to reach all of these stakeholders in society, the businesses, the local government, the regional government, the community leaders, the individual households. If you don't have that system, then there's no way to become more resilient.
So, gentlemen, I think we are coming to the end of this in brief interview. I would like to thank you for your time and for your availability. So what I would ask you now is, one key takeaway. So what do you feel, Bapon, what do you feel your key takeaway would be in the context of your experience in technology, engineering, and climate risk resilience?
I think I would like to take away one important element today from your discussion, actually, that you just raised on the first question, that we don't only look at the technology itself, we also need to look at the people. So when you're talking about the risk communication, it needs to be a mix of people's perception, risk assessment, as well as the appropriate technology to outreach to those people who are at risk. And I think that's the quite important element to looking at those two elements hand in hand.
Ede, from you, what is the key takeaway from your experience around the world and also in different institutional settings?
3 messages on resilience. First, the technology exists today to be able to give practical information to everybody on disasters. There's no reason why every business, every citizen, every government cannot receive that information early enough. Second, that is not sufficient. It is important to build the systems and to support all of those communities and all of those governments to know exactly what to do when they receive that alert. And third, institutions need to be very well coordinated ahead of disasters at the central level, at the local level, across different agencies, to be able to provide the support to communities, not only to be ready for the disaster, but to bounce back better from what they had before.
What do you see a private company like us bringing as the greatest value added to this segment of the world?
One of the critical challenge here is that we always actually talking about public-private partnership, very abstract level, but there is nothing, no investment actually throwing onto the plate that, hey, here is the $1 billion, $1 million for public and private partnership to do some real work in the field. What is happening here, every time we go in a forum, we are talking about public and private partnerships, donor is talking about public and private partnership, but they expect that actually private sector should invest money. But why should we invest money into the market if there is no profit on it? Because private means we need to look at our profitability. And then that's the one of the biggest gap is still in the market, that we are actually talking very abstractly the public and private partnerships. Whereas private, if you look at on the market, the most innovation, most robust, most advanced technology are actually leading by the private industry. So we need to give them a scope how those could be actually channelized, because every time you need to channelize, there is a resources necessary, funding is a requirement, and then support is also needed. So those unless those kind of mechanisms are in place, private sector will not be able to play in that kind of dominating role to supporting into the disaster risk reduction field. And I think that's one of the critical area donors should actually need to listen, or donors need to understand and invest.
Thank you.
All the best. Good to see you both. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye. Have a good day.